because we were looking at it, it was black and it was very high up and it was not moving relative to this tree. And it had kind of a shimmer around it. And it started with a light that came through the ceiling, a blue light that was very solid. It wasn't like a, I mean, I know about lighting because I'm an actress, but it came through like a column. The next phase, I was flat on a table and there was a white, misty room I was in with no walls or anything, just this amorphous mist. And they had white robes on with a high collar. They had the big black wraparound eyes. They had white bodies.
How are you feeling about that? Sort of looking back, are you feeling as if it's been a positive experience or a
I
negative,
I
or
can
it's hard to
I
say?
can say that the fear was a natural reaction to the strangeness of it. I did not feel evil emanating from the beings.
The following is a conversation with Camille James Harman. Camille is an actress based out in the United States. She's also a UFO experiencer. Camille's acting portfolio includes roles in acclaimed productions such as Oscar-winning film Vice, the series Shameless, and her Lifetime movie A Daughter's Deceit. Beyond the screen, she's earned international recognition, securing 3 Best Actress awards for her performance in the short film Tigerlilly in 2022. However, Camille's narrative transcends her acting career since her first UFO sighting in 1995. She's delved deep into the realm of the unexplained, sharing her experiences through writing in the UFO Magazine and presentations at various MUFON events. As a member of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, Camille bridges the worlds of entertainment and the unknown, offering unique insights into the UFO phenomena. Prepare for an enlightening conversation as we explore this pretty deep area of the phenomena, an area where not many people have the guts to discuss so openly, but one that we cannot ignore. So, the following is a conversation with Camille James Harman. Camille, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate your time here. And if it's okay, I'd like to sort of jump in. I like to do this really to get an idea of where people's interest in the subject first began. If you've ever been able to trace it back to a specific time or incident, or anything like that, are you able to trace it?
Definitely. So I'm one of those people you hear about that was triggered, I guess. The whole thing started with a Whitley Strieber book. And it was 1995. I was walking through a bookstore in New Orleans, and I felt a compulsion to buy the book Breakthrough, which was a hardcover book just out. I had never read his earlier books. I knew about him because I'd seen Communion, the movie, because I had a crush on Christopher Walken, but I hadn't read his books. So it was my first introduction to the full subject, the whole scale of the subject, and it really blew my mind. And this happened to me in August of 1995, and by December of 1995, I had my first experience. So that I know of. So it was definitely a correlation with seeing that book and reading that book.
Okay, so that's fairly late
Uh,
in life. I mean, did you have an interest in UFOs at all, like in childhood? Is it a general interest, or did you just pay no attention to that sort of thing? Or
I didn't really pay attention to it as far as reading books about it, but I did enjoy the subject through film in the form of seeing things like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was extremely moving to me. And I would say also I had I had a fixation on the album cover of ELO Into the Blue. That was a thing. But I had a lot of paranormal fears as a kid, and I had some indicators now that I look back that it might have started in childhood, and I just don't remember those things yet. I had a lot of allergies. I had very severe nosebleeds. I would wake up in the morning with the pillow full of blood. I had to have my nose cauterized. I I had a fear of the Slee Stacks from the Land of the Lost TV show, which are reptilian, and I had a fear of the creature from the Black Lagoon, which is reptilian. And everything else I was good. I wasn't afraid of, Dracula or the Mummy or Frankenstein or anything else. So those are kind of, maybes. I don't know. Um, but definitely I was in my late 20s when 1995 was happening and everything started to snowball. It was when I was moving from New Orleans to Los Angeles that everything kicked into high gear.
okay, well, are you comfortable sharing that with us? Your
Yes, so
experience?
yeah. So my boyfriend and I were both actors in New Orleans, and we had reached the point in our careers where we thought we were going to go to LA and make it big. And I had my master's degree from the University of New Orleans. I had my SAG card. I had credits. And, we had just done Richard the Third, and he was Richard, and I was Lady Anne. And we felt, the time's right. We need to go to LA. So we planned to go to LA in September 95, and that's what we did. And on the way, we drove a U-Haul and we had our dog and the car and the whole thing. And I remember we went camping at Oak Creek in Sedona. So maybe something, I don't know. I don't know how this started. Anyway, we got to LA and um, within a few months, everything was going great. We had a great day job. We had a great rental house with a view of the sky. I remember thinking, this is a great view for seeing UFOs. And, it was all good. We had friends. I had an agent, but I noticed that I started having some weird physical symptoms. And I was on the pill, but I had no menstrual cycle starting in September and going on for several months, and usually I had been late before, but I would just go get a pregnancy test. I'd never been pregnant to my knowledge. And for some reason, I didn't go get a test. I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And I was feeling weird things like heartburn and sore breasts and other things that I later learned when I had my son, which were pregnancy symptoms. And so around December, also at this time, this same year, we were walking our dog in Silver Lake. That was the neighborhood of LA where we lived. And she saw a squirrel run up a tree, and we were looking up at the tree, and we saw a UFO, and it was my first one and his first one. We were so excited. And he was teasing me because we were looking at it. It was black and it was very high up, and it was not moving relative to this tree, and it had kind of a shimmer around it. So it was hard to really for sure say what shape it was. I leaned toward a triangle, but I can't really remember. It was so high and it was so tiny. But we looked at it and we're like, what is that? And then we made eye contact and he was teasing me. He said, you and your UFO bug. And so then we looked back up at it and it was gone. And that's when I got really excited. And I handed him the leash and I said, I'm going home. I'm going to report it. So there was a UFO hotline in the phone book back then. And I called it and it was MUFON. And I told him about my UFO, and the guy said, his name was Bill. He said, we have these meetings every month, at the Pickwick Center in Burbank. That's where they were back then. And so I said, oh God, I'm going to the meetings. I'll be there. I'll see you. So at the same time in December, and I wasn't keeping like a journal, so I don't know the exact dates, but that happened in December. But then Eric was watching a David Lynch movie in the living room, and I was sleeping. And I had this attack of sleep paralysis, which I had had before, very, very occasionally, but this time it was very weird. It had other things going on. So I was in the bed, frozen. I couldn't move, terrified. And I heard what sounded like an electronic or a computer generated voice say my name in my ear, just Camille. And I was, you know, and at the same time, I had a flash of an image very brief, of a gun pointed at me in my face. And the whole combination of the paralysis and the audio and the visual, and I was like, what is happening? And I came out of it very upset. And then later that night, he was in the bed with me, and it happened again. Only this time I didn't hear or see anything. I just had the paralysis. And I came out of it crying, and because my voice is what came through first out of it. And then that was very weird. And then by January, my menstrual cycle returned. So, flash forward, I go to a MUFON meeting and I hear Kim Carlsberg give her talk about what happened to her. I don't know if you're familiar with her case.
No.
She's in the entertainment industry too, as she was the set photographer for the show Baywatch. And she was dating, I forgot, the producer or the director, like some big guy in the show, and living with him on the beach in, I think it was Pacific Palisades or Malibu. And she was having abductions. And she had the hybrid breeding thing. And at the end of her talk, I was shaking. I was like shaking in the back row. And I went to look at her book on the table and I'm flipping through it. And in the back, it had a checklist. You may have been abducted if you have this, this, and this. And I was like, oh my God, I have like 85% of these symptoms. And I was introduced to Barbara Lamb, this hypnotherapist, and she was there that night. And I said, I really want to schedule something with you. I think I'm one of these people. I think I'm one of these people, and I we need to look at this night in December when this weird stuff happened. Let's schedule this. So we did that. And during that regression, I had this major, hypnotic terror experience of reliving this event that happened on that night. And it started with a light that came through the ceiling, a blue light that was very solid. It wasn't like I mean, I know about lighting because I'm an actress, but it came through like a column. And when it hit me, I curled up into a fetal position, is how I remember it in hypnosis. And I went up through my ceiling and I was going up, up. I was afraid. I was above my house. I couldn't see a ship though. I didn't see anything. The next phase, I was flat on a table and there was a white, misty room I was in with no walls or anything, just this amorphous mist. And I was terrified. And Barbara had to, she has to talk you through it. And she says, look around. Why are you scared? I said, everyone's looking at me. Everyone's looking at me. And she said, who's looking at you? So anyway, it was this row of beings and they were all the same. And they had white robes on with a high collar. They had the big black wraparound eyes. They had white bodies or very misty, luminous. I couldn't tell if they were luminous or just misty. I didn't see a lot of detail, but they did seem to have a symbol of like an emblem at their solar plexus area that was like a circle with a triangle symbol.
Okay.
And they were telling me to relax. And she said, well, what do these beings want? And I said, I have a baby and they want it. And then my knees went apart. Nothing was touching them. And I got a flash of an instrument like a speculum. And I went totally hysterical. And she said, you can go above your body and remember it from another perspective if that helps. So I did that. And there was a being I couldn't see that I was like blocked from seeing it. And it put this thing in me and took out this little tiny blob of something that I saw barely through the slats of this thing and ran out of the, not ran, walked out of the room with it very quickly. And I was just outraged. I was just saying, they didn't even let me see it. Like, oh, it was just, it was horrible. It was hysterical, teeth chattering, screaming. I think I lost 2 pounds sweating in this memory. And, I went home with this little cassette tape and I played it for my boyfriend. And he was like, oh my God, like, if this is real, this is really bad. And if it's not real, it's really bad because then you're delusional or you've been tricked or. And I showed it, I mean, I played it for my family out of state. And I was like the golden child. You have to understand. I had good grades, was not in trouble, was not crazy. And my mom didn't know what to do. She said, why can't you be gay like your brother? I know how to do gay. I don't know how to do aliens. And at least she made me laugh. Um, I interrogated my uncle from NASA. I have an uncle who he was a mechanical engineer under Werner von Braun. When I was a kid, I lived with him for a year in the late 60s because I was being passed around. I was adopted by my aunt eventually, but I was passed around as a kid. I had a lot of trauma as a kid. And and I don't know if I started going to the base when I lived with him in Huntsville, Alabama, or what, because that's how your brain works, when this happens. You're like, why me? Why did this happen to me? And he just said, I don't know anything. And if it's true, it's NSA, and they're never going to tell you. And so that wasn't very helpful. But other things happened after that in the same house in LA. I had another experience where I woke up 3 mornings in a row at 4 a.m. with a digital clock saying 4 a.m. This was like July of 1996. And I brought that up in a meeting of experiencers once. We were talking about the 3 a.m. thing. And I said, well, mine came at 4 a.m. And they said, what time of year was it? And I said, it was July. And they said, oh, they don't do daylight savings. Good point. That is so interesting. And it's also the devil's hour in Catholicism, 3 o'clock in the morning. So, um, anyway, I had another experience with beings that put a triangle on my leg, like pinprick triangle. That was associated with the 3 mornings in a row, 4 a.m. And I did a regression to that with Yvonne Smith, just to go to somebody different, because she was the other person in town that did regressions. And that was very unique. I had different types of beings, a tall one with the white robes, with the big eyes, but that was the doctor. And at one point it grew antenna and it like morphed into a mantis. And I started screaming, it looks like a big bug. dog. And then there were little shorter ones with dark heads, like brown or gray heads, and they were wrinkly. And one of them put its hand on my forehead, and I was screaming at it. And when it did that, it repulsed me, but him doing that made me calm down. It had a sedative effect to put its hand on my head. So that was interesting. And then the tall one just used this rack with this wand and a little tip, and he put the tip on the wand and popped it in my leg. And that's how I remember the triangle being put on me. But I don't know what it was. It never showed up on X-ray as anything. Um, I had my dentist find an object in my tooth that he had just done a filling on, and I went back to him because that filling hurt, and all my other fillings that he had done felt fine. And he dug it out, and he found a spherical object in my tooth. And he said, I don't know what this is. It wasn't here before when I did this tooth. And so that I did a regression with Barbara to find out how I got this thing in my tooth. And I had a military abduction memory, which is a whole other thing you may have heard
Wow.
about. So,
No.
I mean, I can keep talking, but I mean,
Well,
that happened.
just on that one. So were you able to retain that item from your tooth?
No, I asked my dentist, like, can you get me a chunk of it? And he said, no, it's really, really hard. And he showed it to me with the mirror and the scratchy thing. And he was banging on it while I was looking at it with the mirror. And he said, it's really hard. It's spherical or half spherical. And he said, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, if you can't get me a piece, because he said, I have to keep spraying it with water and I'm just barely putting a dent in it. And I said, well, okay, just fill it again and I'll think about it. So he filled it up and I ended up, the pain stopped. So that made me happy. But I ended up going to a Navy doctor who was attached to MUFON unofficially. I went to see him through Don Waldrop, who ran MUFON LA at the time. And he asked me if I would give up my tooth. And I said no. I didn't want to take the whole tooth out. And so that's that. So whatever's left of it, I guess, is still in there. And I do have an x-ray that does show like a little dome in that area. Um, but it doesn't hurt anymore. So I've had other things. I had a scratch on my shoulder I woke up to, and I had that was from a dream of a spider biting me. And then I would have this pain in that area like a bee sting, and then an electrical jolt would go down my arm. And that would happen every once in a while. And I went to I never did a regression on that, but I met a guy at a party who said he could clear people with mind control. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm a mind control victim. What do you see? And I said, what do I have in my tooth that my dentist found? And he scanned me at this party and he said, whatever was in your tooth isn't working anymore, but what have you got in your right shoulder? And I was like, oh my God, that thing. Oh,
Wow.
yeah, I forgot about that. So he worked on me at his house and he did like this deprogramming. It was a speaking healing. He also put magnets on me. And I wish I'd recorded it because it was really cool, but I don't know exactly what he did. But that feeling stopped. That bee sting and the jolt thing stopped. So it's been such a mystery. I mean, the military abduction thing was so angering. I did that with Barbara Lamb. And when I came to in the memory, I was on a table. There was no mist. There were just, cabinets and like a doctor's office. But there were two guys in lab coats with khaki pants and black shoes. And I felt drugged. I didn't get much information out of that memory. I got that they called me a troublemaker. I got that they put a syringe through my cheek, not like up through my mouth like a dentist would do, but it was this way through my cheek and squirted something in there. And then I was put on a gurney and I was brought to this. I know it sounds very cliche, but it was a hangar and there was a retractable ceiling. They put me in this helicopter. The retractable ceiling opened up. It was daylight. It was really bright. And then I remember going up and they brought me home to my neighborhood in Silver Lake and they landed in this field, which is still a field because I visited it recently. And they said, go home and take a nap. And that's all I remember. So I don't remember how they got me. I don't remember how I got home from the helicopter, how I got into my house. I don't know if it was real, just like all the other hypnosis. You go, well, is that real? Did I read a book and make that up? I don't know. But I came out of it so angry and paranoid because I thought, if that was real, then what else has happened to me that I don't remember? Like now it's my own kind involved. Like I just felt it was a whole different kind of fear.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. And my cassette tape for that did not work. Like the recording didn't work. And I was so upset. I don't know if it was Barbara's fault or the tape's fault, but I have no record of it. I couldn't transcribe it. I was so upset that that didn't work out. And she told me I was her first MyLab client, Regression. So that was back in like 1997. Um, but, I had a lot of good things that happened. I went to Roswell for the 50th anniversary. I went to the crop circles of England in 1998. I made all these amazing friends. I had an angelic OBE under hypnosis with Barbara, which was pure love and ecstasy. And that eclipsed all the other bad things because it was so amazing and something I didn't expect at all. That was the best regression ever. And really gave me some peace about it all in a way. So I could tell you that story.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's incredible,
Um,
isn't it? Coming from from a sighting, all the because it seems to have started really, didn't it? From this sighting, and then bang, in quick
mhm,
succession,
mhm,
you've had all of these events and experiences.
mhm.
I'm keen to know how. I mean, I can see that you're quite open, and you wear your heart on your sleeve, and you're happy to talk about this stuff. Has that always been the case? Were you sort of cautious about who you told in the early days, or were you
No,
very open about it?
I was very open from the beginning. I remember talking freely about it at parties, much to the horror of my boyfriend. Um, he said, "Do you really want to talk about this?" And like, people think you're crazy. You're trying to build your career. What are you doing? And he said, it's like you're a born again Christian, but worse. And I, I, I felt compelled. I felt like it was the most important thing in the world, and I could not be quiet. So I've never had a problem. I've been doing interviews. I was interviewed by the LA Times, and I did other things, back in the 90s. Um, at one point, I decided in Arizona when I moved to Arizona for 10 years with my husband that I met later, who's also an experiencer. Um, I went through a phase where I thought it was all demonic, to be honest. And I dropped out and I went to church and I just didn't give a hoot. I just was in my happy place. I was all about church and I didn't care about it. And then I started to pull back into the subject. Like I thought maybe I threw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm going back in. And I had all this catching up to do because this was around 2022. And so much had happened in those 9 years, that I wasn't keeping up with it all. So I had to catch up. I went to the UFO Congress in Phoenix and I had a good time and I thought, I'm back in, I'm back in. So I mean, I still go to church sometimes, not as much, but I got into Tartaria research. Like I started to suspect everything. I was like, history is not what we're told, and this and that. I was already a conspiracy theorist. I wrote for UFO Magazine for 4 years when I lived in LA. I was very down the rabbit hole already. But I just kind of re-entered the fray in
Yeah.
around the end of 2022, and there's no looking back. I mean, I'm so hooked. I'm so obsessed with the subject, but in a good way now,
Yeah. Yeah.
not fearful, more cautious, but
Do you,
excited.
do you find? I mean, this is what I find sort of most interesting is the balance between positive and negative, and you hear like when we talk about the UFO subject specifically, there's this sort of feeling that once we get disclosure, whatever that means to an individual. But once we get that official, then everything's going to be much better. We're going to have free energy, and the world's going to come together as a species, and all this really positive stuff. And then in that corner, you've got the sort of uncomfortable bit, which is things like abductions, which would appear to most people, I guess, outside looking in, that that's a negative experience. It's a violation, and I find that really interesting that a lot of people I've spoken to who have, admittedly, not that many, and I need to speak to more really, but a lot of people, I should say, the majority of people that have spoken to who have had that kind of experience have said that at the time it was fairly negative, but looking back and what's come of it, it's turned into sort of a positive. How are you feeling about that? Sort of looking back, are you feeling as if it's been a positive experience or a
I
negative,
I
or
can
it's hard to
I
say?
can say that the fear was a natural reaction to the strangeness of it. I did not feel evil emanating from the beings. However, I would say I am still not 100% in the, it's a good thing camp because it's very invasive. It disrupts your life in such a huge way. I don't know what's up with the whole hybrid breeding project. Of course, I've read a million books and heard people talk about it, but I don't know if that's for, you know, coming here and taking over with a bunch of hybrids like David Jacobs thinks. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if it's part of some secret government project and we're just tricked into thinking it's aliens. I cannot make up my mind, and that's been the most frustrating thing. I see all sides and I can't pick a side, and I just keep moving forward and I just say, dear God, please bring me closer to the truth, even if it's ugly. And, I I don't know how this movie ends. Try to stay positive. I'm hanging out with people like Chris Bledsoe, who's very positive. I really get a good feeling from him. He's looked at my video. He's talked to me and he said, Camille, you've got angels working with you, and they've been with you since you were a little girl. And that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. But then I'm like, but what about the hybrids? And what about and he's like, well, I think a lot of that is, not alien. And so then I'm like, okay, great. So what is it? And it's complicated. I don't know if I'll ever have the answers, but none of that's happening to me. I did a lot of things too to make it stop. I went to different healers that prayed over me and did things. And I went to a shaman who did a whole thing on me and he said I had witchcraft put on me. So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a spiritual component to this. And there's definitely a human element to it, that human involvement, whoever those humans are. So it's a mixed bag. And then there's the
Yeah.
cattle mutilations and all these other scary things, people getting
Yeah.
hurt, people getting brain damage and stuff.
Yeah, that complicates it, doesn't it? It really
Yeah.
does complicate it when you're looking at it through a this is a positive thing. And well, what about some of this stuff? Complicated. Have you found have you found that speaking to people and the sort of support and the groups that you've been to and the sort of regression hypnosis, has that really helped you? And would you have
Hmm.
any sort of advice for people who feel as if they're in this kind of camp really, if if they're having these experiences but perhaps not as well researched as yourself and further along?
Yeah, see, I was lucky to live in LA when all this happened, and there were so many resources here. There were groups I could go to, there were conferences, there was MUFON. Now, people living anywhere can still find those resources online. People can be in Zoom meetings for this kind of thing and get a lot of information, even if they don't live in a big city. So that's good. I would say it is a can of worms. So if you're going to immerse yourself in it, be prepared to balance your life with it because it can really take over. I've had a decent acting career, but it's definitely my attention could have been more on my career than on this. And it's definitely been a detour. So, you know,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. The beings told me, the good beings, they said I had to go to Earth to fight evil. So that was interesting. And I said, well, how do I do that? And they said, tell people we exist and we love them. And I said, okay, do you want me to lecture about you or something? And they said, no, do it through acting. And I said, okay. And they said, don't worry, we'll set it up so you meet people and make projects worthy of your time. And I said, great. And they said, you'll reach more people if you keep acting. So that has been true. I've done the very next film I did was about a man who had an angelic encounter right after that regression. Um, and I'm in Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which is a group of networking for Hollywood people to know who each other is in this, interest so that we can find each other and be a part of each other's projects. So, do documentaries or fiction, whatever is appropriate. And we have events. So that's been fun. And I would just say be cautious. You don't have to pick a side. You don't have to figure it all out the first year you get involved. We're all still working on it. And but it can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine, Dr. Jess Mina. I don't know if I think you've met her at the most recent Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. She was, I think, she was sort of sitting in, and you were talking, I think, or giving a
Yes.
presentation. She had, great things to say, and Jess is fantastic. But she'd mentioned that I think it was yourself that said that there seems to be a lot more women when it comes to abduction experiences more so than men, or there seems to be some kind of at least anecdotal evidence to say that that women are more sort of affected, I guess, by abductions. I don't know if that was you that said it or not, but it was an
Yeah.
interesting point because I do this thing where I often look through sort of analytics. I'm a bit funny about that and obsessive, sort of the site and the YouTube and all that sort of stuff, and just look through analytics. And I often find it really interesting that I've got a very low representation of women in the viewership of the YouTube channel and Instagram
Mm.
and stuff. And I always wonder why that is. I'm thinking like it's probably around the sort of 80% men and 20% women. And it feels like a very male dominated kind of space. I don't understand why. And I'd like to know why.
Yeah,
But
I think it's science. I think the men are more into the science and they understand science more. And I think the women are more into discussing the experience or perspective and discussing feelings and experiences more. That's because I have a master's in theater and I was terrible in physics and chemistry and math. So maybe that's just the way my brain works. But I think it's that way. Also, men have more risk when it comes to being losing their living if they talk publicly about it, whereas more women might be a little more flexible in that department. Um, my husband pays all the bills. He's an astrologer, so we're a woo couple. We can get away with being woo, but a lot of people can't publicly
yeah,
anyway. So it could be that, you know.
yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, I always find it interesting. It's one of those that I mean I don't know what the answer is, but that does make a lot of sense. Um, I just wonder what we can do to sort of change that a bit because I mean that sort of seems to be the goal for yourself and for others is to speak about this so that other people can understand more and perhaps feel more comfortable with their experiences. But the sort of ultimate goal, I think, certainly from my perspective, is to try and get us a little bit closer to understanding, and maybe that's disclosure or just some closeness to consciousness or whatever it is that gets us further along
Right.
wherever it is we're trying to get to. That makes I'm not articulating it
Yeah.
very well, but it seems like that's what we're trying to do
Well, my
collectively.
gift, when people say, "Do you have any abilities?" Sometimes people get abilities from their experiences. And, are you a healer? Are you psychic? They'll ask me things like that. And I say no. But I do communicate. I'm a communicator. And so, um, I mean, I'm an actress. I used to teach. I taught kindergarten through college, so I can stand up in front of a group and talk. And I network with people. I meet people by happenstance all the time because I open my mouth. I wear t-shirts. People come up and talk to me and then I hear their story. So my superpower is finding others, connecting the dots, hearing other people's stories. And so from my perspective, it's super common. It's super prevalent in society because that's been my experience.
Yeah, fascinating. How do you feel about where we are currently with the whole disclosure subject and obviously the whistleblowers and the congressional hearings and stuff? And
Yeah.
I'm often I often get that thought in my head when I talk to people about their experiences, and they're like, "Look, I know what my experience was. I've spoken about it enough. I've been open about it enough.
Right.
I don't really need the CIA to tell me it's real or the
Right.
president to tell me it's real." But then for me, I would imagine, and this is just a personal thing, there would be this sort of a slight sense of vindication. Like I kind of, although I say I don't, I kind of would like just that little something to vindicate me and for the sort of friends that laughed at me or didn't take me seriously or whatever it might be. Is there any of that with you at all? How do you feel about, you know, the potential of maybe getting some disclosure? It's been flirted with at the moment.
I feel it's imminent. I feel it's imminent on many fronts. First of all, I'm 58 years old. So there are a lot of people my age and older in the experiencer groups that I attend. And if the beings know some kind of timeline, if they have access to the future and they wanted to work toward a certain goal, they have been working with people that are now my age and older to be in positions of authority and to be useful if disclosure happens, just because of our experience and our age. So I think they would not have wasted their time with us if it was going to happen in 100 years. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think this administration is very friendly to disclosure. I think there are a lot of other things that they're putting in place before that happens that need to be there to keep, this. the civilization functioning. Um, I also think it's up to the beings. I think I think our government knows that, and they're working toward a certain time frame. And it could involve more than just the beings coming. It could involve some earth changes that are imminent. It could involve all kinds of things. We don't know. I've had dreams of tidal waves and tornadoes and volcanoes all my life. Other experiencers have dreams of nuclear war and things like that. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. I'm kind of ready for anything. I mean, I'm not ready, but I'm, psychologically aware of all of these things that might be imminent as well that involve the beings coming. So I mean, nobody gets out alive unless we ascend, right? We all die somehow. So we have to just be here for this exciting time and stay positive and stay helpful to each other no matter what happens so that we can be, useful in this kind of scenario. But I think disclosure is already happening through television and news and documentaries. News Nation's doing good work, and the Nazca mummies, like that is so
Yeah.
huge. I don't know why that's not on mainstream news yet, but maybe the Pope who lived in Peru will be part of disclosure, and he'll have to, you know, integrate the Nazca mummies to the whole scenario. So who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to hear a lot more about that. I think that Jesse Michaels, American Alchemy, is doing a bit of work on the Nazca mummies. He's got a very big platform, so I think it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see what comes from him. Absolutely interesting. All right. Well, look, Camille, I've really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you sharing with me and taking the time to talk it through. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been fun. I'm going to be at Contact in the Desert in a couple of
Oh,
weeks. If
cool.
anyone's going to be there, I'm not speaking, I'm just going to attend. So that's my next conference, and it'll be fun to see everyone again. I've been there 3 years in a row now. So,
Yeah, I'd love to. I think a couple of my friends went last year, and I was like, I'm definitely going to go next year. That's my plan. It's going to happen. We're going to make it happen. But I can't. I can't make it
yeah,
happen.
it's hard. I just went to one in Wisconsin with Chris Bledsoe and his whole family. They were there. It was called Contact Modalities Expo, and it was a new conference, and that was really fun. That was a couple of weeks ago. So I try to get around and do things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's fantastic that so many people are getting together and just sharing experiences and just being so open about the subject that had so much stigma for so long, and it just feels like it's just falling away very, very
Mhm,
quickly, which is
mhm.
fantastic. It's exciting times, really is.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
superb.
thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Camille. I really
All
appreciate
right.
it, and stay in touch. Talk soon, hopefully.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take
Thank you.
care. Cheers. Bye now.